Welcome to a new episode, a new review of the Netflix ESPN documentary series, The Last Dance, now on episodes 3 and 4. My name is Gilberto Cervantes, and I'm joined once again by my cousin, Javier Cervantes. How you doing, Javier? How are things in Chicago?
It's fabulous. It's going to be 75 degrees Fahrenheit today, and we're going to just enjoy the wonderful weather during this interesting time. How are you doing?
Fantastic. It's actually great weather in Norway as well. So people are out and about, and things are getting better and better over here with the whole situation. So I'm glad that it's going in a good direction.
Very nice.
All right. So the contents of episode 3 and episode 4 include a lot of Dennis Rodman and a lot of Phil Jackson, and quite a bit on the Detroit Bad Pistons squad that were kind of like a big stone along the way, the journey that Michael Jordan had to take and able to become a champion. You and I have had certain discussions, in the past about certain people involved. And I just wanted to get started with Dennis Rodman. I want to preface this by saying I'm a huge Rodman fan, but yeah, I mean, I just want to hear some of your perhaps first impressions, how you came to know him when you were still a kid and watching perhaps the Detroit team in those first years he was in the NBA, and how perhaps what you felt in those early years changed to when he was in Chicago.
Okay. Well, I'm not unique in this perspective. I mean, not being a Detroit fan when he was on the Pistons, the guy was just a freak athlete, and that team was so deep. So Rodman's not even one of the first names that comes to mind when that team really started their ascent. So as a Bulls fan, I couldn't stand Rodman. He was a menace. He was aggressive. His defense is just, obviously that's what he's known for, his rebounding. So the young Rodman, who's just a super athlete, whose motor goes 100% all the time, he's just a force of nature. So watching your favorite team, or my favorite team at the time, the Bulls, go up against him was difficult. And you obviously grew to dislike him. The dirty plays, they're documented. Whether it was against the entire league, but first against the Celtics, then against the Bulls. Obviously, when the Pistons were up against the Lakers, he mixed it up with all the famous Lakers. But I will say, when he went to the Spurs, and he became the Rodman that we come to know today, with a different persona, he really caught my eye. He was different. I was young, impressionable, and then, as the trade was made to come to the Bulls before the '96 season, reluctant at first to think, wow, this guy's going to play for the Bulls, but you knew what he could do. So hey, welcome him with open arms, and he was embraced quickly by all Bulls fans.
Yeah, I can imagine that it's not that hard to embrace him when he played the way he did. But in the early years, he was part of this whole Detroit squad that became to be known as the Detroit Bad Boy Pistons. And of course, I was barely born to even remember the early years of this squad. But with the magic of the internet and YouTube and ESPN, etc., I've been fortunate enough to be able to watch some of their past games, and I believe it was you that first asked me if I'd watched the 30 for 30 Bad Boy Pistons documentary. And when I did, I was just like, whoa, I had absolutely no idea. And I gotta be honest, like, when I was a kid and I was getting started, like, with playing basketball, that was when Rodman was with the Bulls, and he was the kind of player that I just loved all of it, like all of the antics, all of the mental games, all of the little like acting, the slight flopping, the little elbows here and there. I just thought it was fantastic. And I mean, I don't think this is the best thing for like a kid or a teenager to be developing in his game, but that was one
No,
thing that I definitely liked doing. And against coaches and, well, definitely coaches and other players, I
I'm sure
always
you'll.
try to play mental games. Yeah.
I'm sure they'll get into it more throughout the series. But the fact that a player like Carl Malone would let Rodman get in his head as much as he did, and they show it briefly in that regular season game in Utah in 98 in episode 4. I mean, he's pushing the guy around, getting in his face. Where a guy like Malone, all he has to do is ignore him, just play his game. But no, Rodman had a way of getting into the head of these players. How it didn't matter how good they were.
Yeah, correct. And while this was seen by a lot of people as something very negative, bad for the game, etc., although I was a kid, I just loved it. I was just like, this is perfect. This is the kind of thing that I want to be doing. Not the physical aspect, but just the mental part of just annoying
Mhm.
players, just being a pest, etc. So I'm just saying this, enable for you to know that there's absolutely no way that I can ever be objective whenever speaking of Dennis Rodman. And then when I found out about this whole squad of bad boys and their motto and the way they played, well, I liked them even more. And I believe that you're completely on the other side. So, what can you tell me about the bad boy Pistons and which particular players you disliked the most, other than Rodman?
It's it's funny looking back at it now. We've had discussions many times about that team as both being huge basketball fans. Looking back now, I love that team. I respect the hell out of them, what they accomplished on the court, how they came to be world champs. And if you look at that roster, I mean, they are so deep. And I don't need to get into the details. Anyone that's watched any of those documentaries or even just peeked at this current documentary knows the talent. And they didn't. Isaiah, super talented, all time top 30 player in the history of the league. He was their go-to guy, but Dumars is no slouch. I always respected him. He's a two-way player that dominated on both ends, and he was not a big guy. I mean, he's what, a 6'2" guard.
Yeah.
Um, I always appreciated obviously Rodman and Sally with what they did on the defensive end and on the rebounding edge. And I mean, their center was a good scorer. What's his James Buddha,
Mm.
and when they had Vinnie Johnson, who was an electric scorer off the bench. When they acquired Aguirre, again another bold move by their GM. They were such a deep team, and at that time NBA teams were deeper. The league was smaller, but it just seemed like every piece fit perfectly into that team, and they came at you with waves both offensively and defensively.
Yeah, correct. So, the leader of this team, Isaiah Thomas, I didn't really watch basketball when he was playing. I was way too young, but through through documentaries and through videos and studying the history, I really came to like his game. And I mean, he's the kind of point guard that I really, really like and enjoy watching any of his film. Now, that being said, by no means do I believe that off the court he's a role model. The one thing that stuck with me the most was the incident that he had with Larry Bird. But I also
Mhm.
believe that there are certain things, like the whole handshake episode that is shown in the Last Dance documentary, that are certainly overblown. So, can you give me your take on that and why it is such an important thing and why it's just mentioned all the time?
Yeah, and I understand both sides of it. Obviously, I'm biased here. I'd like to say the following: you take Isaiah, you split him up. There's Isaiah the player, who you cannot argue was a magnificent player, and he has that personality that That's that $1 million smile where he just
Yeah.
comes off as the nice guy. But Isaiah has a dark history. Some would call him a con man. Whether you know all of his history off the court or not, it's it's all out there for anyone to look up. So at the time, for him to walk off the court and you look at the video, it's not like he's walking past the bench. He's almost kind of a slime ball, hiding his head, making sure no one sees him. It's a very take a close look at that again if you haven't rewatched it. It's just it's creepy. It's it's something that if you're proud of what you've done, you walk off the court head held high. He did not. He was trying to weasel his way out of that arena.
Yeah, that's 100% true. And if there's one thing that I criticize the most about this in how Isaiah handled it was the fact that, first of all, he did it half heartedly, like you're pointing out. You can see that he's kind of ducking, he's not really going for it. And then the other thing is, come on, I mean, just let it go. He's been all over social media as of late, just making more and more and more remarks to justify what he did. Like,
Mhm.
if there's one thing that I appreciate about that bad boy team was that the person that was probably disliked the most at the time, that was Bill Lambier, he always owned it, right? There was absolutely no half-heart actions from him. He just
He did,
owned,
and what?
yeah,
Sorry, and watching him play over the years, I mean, he is what he is. He was a jerk on the court, and he's a jerk off the court,
yeah,
and you can see it in what he said before, during, and after all this. So there's little doubt about that. And sorry, coughing here. And if you look at the style that they played and the commentary that was made where the Celtics walked off the court when the Pistons dethroned them, if you look back at those series, I mean, those two teams had it out for each other and they disliked each other. And I can see why the Celtics would say, enough with these guys. We don't like them. We're out of here. It didn't play the same way here with the Bulls and Pistons. And again, a biased opinion on my end. And that team, the Bulls wiped the floor with them in 91.
yeah.
So they just again put their tail between their legs and walked out.
Correct. And you know what? One of the main things that was done, or one of the changes that happened, that a lot of people, or at least it's shown this way in the documentary. Um, Phil Jackson replacing Doc Collins. Um, what do you remember about that move? And looking back at it, how popular was it when it was made? When Phil was not yet a proven coach.
Yeah. So it was an unpopular move locally with the media, with the fans. I'm sorry, Doug was very popular with the players and the community. He's an outgoing guy. You can, he became, a well-known broadcaster. Even came back to the Bulls, which again shows how the ownership is real loyal to their employees. He's currently an advisor to the owner. And Doug, he was an emotional guy. He wore his emotions on his sleeve. Phil comes in, he's really quiet. He's this philosophical guy. He talks with the media in a different tone. So it took a while for everyone to warm up. And then obviously the results brought him, all the fanfare, and everyone fell in love with Phil.
Yeah, well, it's really hard for me, or for anyone for that matter, to really make assumptions. But the documentary portrays this whole coaching change as, yeah, like that was key. We needed Phil. Like, Dog was not really into the X's and the O's. We were missing some things in on offense, but I don't know. Like, is there really that much to it? It seems like the Bulls were short on a game 7 the previous season. And maybe if the whole migraine situation hadn't happened, they'd have gone the whole distance. So, in your very personal opinion, do you feel like this whole coach coaching change is overblown, or
Well,
how
here,
do you look at it?
so one one minor correction there is that so Phil was the coach for the year of the Game 7 of
Oh,
90.
okay, yeah, correct.
Yeah,
Sorry, my bad. Yeah,
Doug was let go. No, yeah, Doug was let go that season before 89 90.
okay,
So Phil coached one year where they didn't make the finals, and then the second season they made the finals. But yeah, I mean, it was well known that Doug was just, hey, let Michael do his thing, and we'll find a way to win that way. Where Phil wanted to get everyone else involved and make sure that Michael did his thing, but didn't forget about the team, and that's well documented, and obviously the results speak for themselves.
all right, very well. Um, the uh, the series shows a lot of the ways that Phil Jackson was good at handling the personalities and the different personnel that he had in his team. Um, Very particularly back to Dennis Rodman, when he had the whole episode of going to Vegas. I believe this was just one thing that they showed, but they didn't show all of the things that were going on with Dennis Rodman in his life in those years that he was with the Bulls. So, what can you tell us about how it was being a Chicago Bulls fan and having a personality like Rodman just going out and about and doing so many things?
I mean, all the dates, I can't go back and say what happened what year
Yeah.
because I'm getting to be an old man now. But I will say this: it was always a circus with that guy, and this is all pre-social media. I remember being just turning 2021 in those final championship years, and imagine now. Oh, Rodman's at this club. Rodman's here. Rodman's at this bar. Rodman's doing this. That would all be word of mouth. I mean, that was all like if something happened, we might get a primitive message or not a voicemail on our answering
Yeah.
machine, like, "Hey, did you hear Rodman's at this such and such place? My buddy saw him there, here, or there." It's just funny stuff now to think about where that would be all over all over social media nowadays. So he had a following locally with his social life. But then his on the court antics or basketball related stuff, it was in the news daily. Whether it was he was late to practice or he, Vegas is one thing, but let's say they were out on the West Coast and he was out in L.A. and didn't show up to practice and didn't show up to warm ups, and it was always something with him, and it was funny at being a young fan, but I'm sure for the team it was a major distraction, and having Phil to kind of massage that entire situation for the team was essential in those later years.
Yeah. So just to set the record straight, so what you're saying is that the incident that they show with the whole Vegas trip was by no
Mhm.
means an isolated incident.
No, I mean, obviously the 48-hour vacation might have been the only one, but no, he went off all the time, and he was out all the time. He's a noted big Pearl Jam fan and into rock music. He'd be at shows, and you'd hear about it in the newspaper where they, if they had a game that night, he was out in a concert and out till 3, 4 in the morning, which NBA players do, but it's just this guy was all day, every day.
Yeah, it was definitely next level. Um, yeah, so that's one of the two things that I believe Phil Jackson is best known for. One of them being the triangle, and the second one just being so good at managing personnel and egos, etc. And speaking of that, the last part of episode 4 shows that while Pippen was out, Dennis Rodman took a larger role. There was this one game where he let Michael down, but then uh, he apologized in a very weird way, but Michael got it, and then he was straight for a
That was
while.
one of the cooler moments, by the way,
Yeah, that
of
was
the documentary so far. That story and a lot of those stories, it's neat to hear Jordan go into those stories that I hadn't heard, and I'm sure a lot of other people hadn't.
I thought it was really, really telling. Rotman had said multiple times after he retired that he never spoke to Michael. He never spoke to Scotty, and I guess it's true. Sometimes you just don't even need to speak, right? Just his actions and the way he handled himself just told Michael, "Okay, I'm sorry I let you down. Let's go do this." And even before Scotty came back, the Bulls were riding the ship. So when Scotty, once he came back, it just seemed like the Bulls once again uh, regained their confidence. As a fan, how do you feel about the Bulls' chances, even if Scotty had not come back?
I mean, there's a concern there without him to go all the way because I mean he is what he is. He's a dominant force on both ends of the court, and I don't have the stats in front of me, but he's still an 18 to 20 point scorer a game. So where are you going to recuperate that offense? So come playoff time where games are not played at the pace they are now, 80, 90 points, taking away that percentage of points, it's hard to get that back. So yeah, there is concern there. Without Pippen, they won't get that next ring.
Yeah, correct. Um, I I honestly have really struggled as of late with the whole Scottie Pippen analysis because there in a lot of ways I feel like in certain ways he's underrated. When people talk about him as, oh, he was just a number two, always a number two, I think that's ridiculous. But then there's ways in which people or the media overrates him, I believe. For example, I saying, oh, he was the best defensive player on that team. Like that's insane. Like whenever people say that he was a better defender than Michael Jordan, I don't know. I guess you can maybe debate it, but I feel like that's way out of proportion. What are your feelings on that particular part?
So first of all, your comment about Pippen underrated, overrated, that's going to live with him. Is that'll live in history.
That's his legacy.
It'll that debate. Yeah, that debate will go on forever. It's hard to really analyze him. He's such a unique player. He had such unique talents, and yet where did history place him? Playing alongside the best player of all time. So, what would he have been without Jordan? We don't know. We saw what he did one season without him, but with a super talented team. He's, I mean, this is not my unique idea. It's just the argument that's been placed recently is, you know, Jordan during those years. It's funny to think that the one player that probably could have stopped him on the defensive end or slowed him down was playing alongside him.
Yeah, correct.
Yeah, and I sit back and think, wow, what would those matchups have been like? Pippen on another team going up against Michael. That in their primes, that would have been fantastic to watch. But the what was that second part of that question?
Yeah, do you believe that he's a better defender than Michael?
I my perspective from watching those last few years of them together was, and not taken away from Jordan, but he was older, his body was different than early Michael, and he would take it easier on the defensive end, and while Scotty maintained that level because they needed Michael's offense, and he would expend more energy on the offensive end. Now in crunch time, and we'll get to Game 6, Michael laid it all out on the line on both ends of the court. But yeah, he was an older player at by 97, 98, and he wouldn't go up against the other team's best offensive player all the time, and they'd leave that up to Scotty.
Yeah, correct. I believe. I mean, the perspective that I'm looking at it from is just their whole careers, and I agree that Scotty is a more versatile defender. He could guard more positions than Michael, even in his prime when he played. When Chicago won their first championship, rewatching some of those games against the Lakers, it's clear that Scotty was a much better matchup against a bigger guy like Magic Johnson, for example. So I don't think Michael could guard, more than three positions, whereas Scotty could guard four. He could hold his own with the bigger players, but the defensive presence and the fear that Michael Jordan put on his adversaries, maybe on his prime years and his earlier years, I don't know. I'm not sure that Scotty ever got there.
Yeah, I can agree with that. Yeah, maybe top level Jordan, but overall, the variety of players that Pippen can defend gives him the edge on that end.
Yeah,
So
yeah, perhaps.
either way, to have them both on the same team was just a luxury that
Correct. It's
the
just
few
crazy to
coaches
think
have
about.
had.
I mean that team defensively, it's just a joy to watch. And you have them. You have those two. You have Rotman. You have Harper, which was he could hold his own. So
Yeah.
it was just a joy. So to wrap things up, what can you tell me? What are you looking forward the most in the remaining episodes?
Well, to be honest, someone that there have been things that I've learned, little anecdotes and little stories, but I want to get into that last season. They've
Yeah,
done a lot looking back at the build up to those years and the backstory of some of the main players. But I want to see the behind the scenes footage. I want to hear the conversations that no one else was privy to, and that's what I'm really looking forward to.
yeah. I really hope it's good that you mentioned that because there's been very little of it. So I'm hoping that we get I don't know how much we're gonna get for 5 and 6, but I'm hoping that 7 and 8 are gonna be mostly focusing on that. It would be just awesome to get a barrage, like almost a montage of of all of the stuff happening behind the scenes on that season.
Yeah, and I know we touched on it last time. Zach Lowe just came out with an article based on the Game Seven Bulls Pacers, a real in-depth look at that game with a lot of great quotes from the Pacers. Uh, I was at that game. When we get to that, I do have some vivid memories of that
Oh man,
that game.
that's awesome. I haven't read the article, so I'm definitely gonna check it out. All right, so thank you for doing this. It was fun, and I hope to do it again.
All right,
All right,
until next time.
yes, thank you. Bye.